Hello everyone. For many people, faith is not just about rituals or prayers, but the very breath of the soul, a small light that shines through the darkest moments. Have you ever heard a story about a holy soul, someone who chose to remain in this world? Not to perform dazzling miracles, but simply to quietly love and protect us? In today's video, I'll share with you a true and very special story, deeply rooted in Catholic spirituality, a gentle yet profound story that reminds us the light of faith never fades. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe to Fogman Stories so we can continue to journey together through many more spiritual stories ahead. Thank you so much for being here. Today's story is titled, The Nun Who Never Left. Chapter 1. The Silent Walls. They once told me that the walls here could speak, but not with words. I was barely 24 when I arrived at Sainte-Madeleine, wrapped in the veil of a novice and bearing the biting chill of a winter harsher than any I had known. Normandy that week was drowned in fog, a heavy mist that clung to stone, to habits, to the very breath I exhaled. The train had taken me only so far, to a small station miles from the nearest village, and the rest of the journey I had to walk. My boots crunched over frozen ground, and a trail of old wooden signs led me through bare trees until I saw it, the convent. It emerged from the mist like a half-forgotten hymn, weathered stone walls, ivy trailing from tall windows, the scent of incense still lingering in the cold air. And there, behind the heavy iron gate, the walls seemed to wait. I had come here in search of silence. After the fire that destroyed my family's home, after the grief that stole my voice, I no longer asked God for answers, only for stillness, for a place unmoving, unshaken. Sainte-Madeleine was exactly that. Still, remote, a fortress of prayer and shadow. I remember that first night. The corridor was lit by only a few wall sconces, their flames trembling. My room was small, clean, with a wooden crucifix hanging above the bed. The stillness was so complete, I could hear the wax melting. But it wasn't the silence that unsettled me. It was the weight, as though the stone walls were watching, as though the prayers once uttered here had never stopped echoing. I tried to calm myself, told myself it was the cold, the unfamiliar, but on the third night, while I knelt in the chapel for adoration, it happened. I closed my eyes. I whispered, "Lord, I am not worthy," and I meant it with every wound I still carried. And then, I smelled lilies. Faint, unmistakable, blossoming in air where no flowers grew. I opened my eyes. Candlelight flickered. The brass monstrance gleamed on the altar. And across the nave, there was movement. Not sound, not shadow. A presence. The hair on my neck stood on end. I turned my head. No one. But my heart pounded as if I had seen someone my eyes had missed. That night, on the way back to my room, I heard them. Footsteps. Soft. Rhythmic. Not mine. I stopped. Held my breath. They stopped too. The next morning, returning to the chapel, I found a petal, white, curved, resting on the pew where I had prayed. I didn't tell anyone, not yet, but I began to watch more carefully, to listen. I noticed one of the older sisters always genuflected an extra time when passing the west transept. Another lit 2 candles instead of 1 before compline. I began to see patterns. Gestures of reverence hinting at something, or someone, unspoken. One evening, while helping fold linens in the sacristy, Sister Madeleine, her hands softened by years in holy oil, said softly, "Sometimes, she still walks the halls." I looked up. She said nothing more, and I understood. No explanation was needed. Sister Thérèse. I had heard the name in whispers, not in fear, but in reverence. A nun who had served here centuries ago, during the time of plague. One who had refused to leave when others were evacuated. One who had died while praying before the Blessed Sacrament. Alone yet radiant, she never left. Another had once murmured, as if speaking of the Tabernacle. I didn't know what to believe, but as the days passed, I began to feel it, not fear, not dread, but something sacred, something that made me want to kneel longer, sing softer, weep more freely. I remembered what the Gospel said, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And in those stone halls filled with memory, I began to wonder, what if holiness lingers? What if some prayers are so pure, so complete, they never fade? The walls remain silent, but they are not empty. They are listening. Chapter 2. Her name was Thérèse. I wasn't looking for anything in particular when I found it. It was a morning thick with rain. The kind that taps gently on old glass and makes even the strongest walls feel a little softer. I had been assigned to help tidy the convent library, a task Sister Agnes usually kept to herself. As if the books were old friends too sacred for clumsy hands. But she was nursing a sore wrist that week, and I was quiet, careful, and new, so she handed me the key. The library was nothing like the grand halls you'd find in cathedrals. It was humble, long and narrow, with shelves that groaned under the weight of centuries. Dust floated like incense in shafts of morning light. I moved slowly, touching nothing at first, just breathing in the scent of old parchment and beeswax. I felt as though I had stepped inside a memory, a place woven from whispers and candle smoke. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, some tilted at odd angles, others bound in leather cracked with time. A few were chained to the shelves, relics from when knowledge had to be guarded like treasure. I remember running my fingertips along the spines, the raised letters barely readable. There were chant books, volumes of scripture in Latin and Greek, biographies of saints, and journals written in long-forgotten hands. That's when I saw it. A thin, leather-bound journal wedged behind a row of faded missals. The leather had cracked at the edges, and the gold lettering on the spine was nearly gone. I had to tilt it under the light to see it at all. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled it free. It was lighter than I expected, as if it had been waiting to be lifted. I opened to the first page. 1734. Lent. My breath caught. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, and looped like embroidery. It began plainly, with notes about food rations and infirmary needs. But then it changed. The voice grew warmer, more human. She wrote of fatigue, of prayer, of how the bells sounded different when rung for the dying. Her name appeared halfway through the journal. Thérèse, not sister, just Thérèse. She had come to Sainte-Madeleine at 19, full of joy, brimming with questions. Her entries were simple, beautiful, She tended to the sick when the plague came. She gave away her bread, her warmth, her strength. The others called her foolish at first, for holding the hands of the dying, for sleeping in the infirmary rather than her cell. But then they began to admire her. Her peace was contagious. She wrote about the fevers that spread through the region, about the mothers who lost their children, the neighbors who buried their neighbors. She never named them, but she remembered their faces. The pages were full of sorrow, but not despair. There was a lightness even in her grief, as if she were pouring all of it into God. And then, the words began to tremble. She wrote about her own fever, not with fear, but with gentleness, as if it were a guest she had long expected. My hands shake as I write, she penned in one of her final entries. But my heart is still. If this be my hour, then let it be my offering. Fiat voluntas tua. I don't remember how long I sat there, the journal resting like a prayer between my hands. The library around me faded. Time slowed. I could feel her, through the pages, through the years. There was no desperation in her writing. Only love, only surrender, only an aching kind of holiness. That evening, I returned the journal to its place, but not before pressing my palm to the cover, as though saying goodbye to a friend. For the next several mornings, I came back. I would kneel near the shelf and read the same few pages again and again. Not because I had forgotten them, but because I wanted to remember better. One morning, as I read her last entry by candlelight, I whispered her name aloud for the first time. Thérèse. It felt like prayer, not an invocation, not a summoning, just a name, lifted gently, like a flower laid at a grave. From that night on, I began speaking to her, quietly, in my cell before bed, in the garden, sometimes even in the chapel, when the others had gone. Not out loud, but in the silence of my thoughts. I asked her to help me, not with miracles, not with signs, just with presence, just with peace. And then came the night I will never forget. It was storming, thunder echoing through the hills. I had woken in the early hours. Unable to sleep, I wrapped my shawl around me and crept down to the chapel. The stones were cold beneath my feet, and the candles had long since burned low. But the tabernacle glowed faintly in the dark, like a heartbeat. I knelt. My thoughts were tangled. I felt the ache of everything, my past, my grief, my longing to belong. And so I prayed more simply than I had in years. No lofty requests, no polished phrases, just one plea. Sister Thérèse, if you are still near, help me find peace. At first, there was only silence, then a warmth, not heat, not fire, but something like a soft blanket laid across my shoulders. Something like being seen, and for the first time since arriving, I felt it, not fireworks, not visions, just a stillness, deep and quiet, that settled inside my chest like a hand resting gently over my heart. I stayed kneeling long after the others had gone, because in that silence, I knew I was not alone. Days passed. The journal remained in its place, but its words followed me like footsteps in snow. I began writing again, timidly at first, then more freely. I wrote about my days, my doubts, my moments of unexpected grace. I wrote to Thérèse. One evening, as I walked through the cloister, I heard music, faint and thin. like the echo of a hymn sung long ago. I followed it to the old west wing, now closed off for repairs. The door was ajar. I stepped inside. There was no one, only a scent, lilies, and an open book on the floor. A hymnal. The page turned to Ubi Caritas, where charity and love are. God is there. I didn't cry. I smiled, because I understood then. Thérèse hadn't stayed because she couldn't leave. She stayed because she was still serving. And in that knowledge, I found what I had prayed for all along. Peace. Her name was Thérèse, and she had never stopped loving. Chapter 3: The Nights of Eucharistic Adoration. I don't know when I began to look forward to the nights of keeping vigil. At first, it was simply a part of the convent's daily schedule. Each sister would take turns for nocturnal Eucharistic adoration. From dusk until dawn, 1 hour per person, 1 hour of silent prayer before the Blessed Sacrament, a stretch of time that could feel endless. Especially when tiredness and the night's chill seeped into your bones. But for me, that hour gradually became an anchor. The first time I was assigned the 2 a.m. shift, I remember resting my head on my hands as I knelt in the chapel. Eyes heavy with sleep, my heart burdened with a sadness I couldn't name. Candlelight flickered on the altar. A sacred stillness cloaked the space like a heavy robe draped over my restless soul. I couldn't quite put into words what I felt that night. A quiet warmth, like someone watching me from behind. There was no sound, no movement, but I knew I wasn't alone. From that night on, each hour of adoration brought with it a strange anticipation. Not exactly excitement, not fear. It was like standing before a door, knowing that behind it was something I would never fully understand, and yet still wanting to enter. One night, I arrived earlier than my assigned time. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts flapped inside me like restless birds. I tiptoed into the chapel, where only a few half-burned candles remained, and the Blessed Sacrament quietly radiated from the monstrance. The light spilled across the stone floor. I knelt, closed my eyes, and began to softly recite the act of love. When I opened my eyes, I saw it, clearer than ever before. A figure in a white habit, kneeling one pew in front of me, head bowed, hands folded, no sound, no movement. I didn't dare look too long. I closed my eyes, my heart pounding, but I felt no fear, only a peace that pierced through me. When I opened my eyes again, the seat was empty, only the flickering light remained on the stone wall, and a single lily lay neatly on the pew. I didn't tell anyone about it, not because I feared disbelief, but because I felt I had been entrusted with a secret, a private gift from the unseen. Later, I began to realize I wasn't the only one. A few older sisters in the convent showed quiet signs during night vigils, a lingering gaze toward the western transept, an extra stick of incense offered without explanation, an extra long genuflection before rising. One evening, I sat beside Sister Heloise in the kitchen after dinner. I blurted out, "Have you ever felt someone else in the chapel at night?" She didn't answer right away. She poured me another cup of tea, then gently said, "Some souls, they don't need to leave, because they still have work to do, and because they still love this place." She didn't explain further. but the look in her eyes told me she understood exactly what I meant. And from that look, I knew I wasn't alone in this quiet belief. I began praying to Sister Thérèse more directly. No longer secret whispers in my thoughts. Each time I entered the chapel, I murmured an invitation. If you are here, please pray to God for me. I wasn't asking for miracles, but what happened after felt like whispers from heaven brushing gently against the earth. Once, while praying, a cool breeze swept across my face though the windows were closed. Another time, I heard a soft sound, like a Gregorian chant echoing faintly when all was silent. I also noticed that whenever I was troubled, I would be led to the exact page I needed to read, a song, a passage from St. Paul's letters, or a diary entry from Thérèse I hadn't seen before. One night, I was kneeling and tears fell for no clear reason. I felt empty, as though all the strength in me had been drained. I only bowed my head and whispered, I have nothing left to offer. Not even words, not even these tears. In that moment, under the golden glow of candlelight, I felt a hand lightly rest on my shoulder. As light as air, as fragrant as lilies. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew it was Thérèse. After that night, I began writing everything I felt. I recorded my dreams, the signs, the silences full of meaning. I didn't intend to prove anything. I just didn't want to forget, because there was a humble but powerful presence slowly becoming part of my soul. And I realized that holiness doesn't always come in blazing lights or thundering prophecy. Some, like Thérèse, are holy through presence, through stillness, through staying, not to be remembered, but to continue loving. One night, I sat alone in the chapel after adoration. I looked up at the Blessed Sacrament and softly asked, Sister Thérèse, why are you still here? There was no reply, but a phrase echoed within me, not from someone else, but from deep inside, because I still love, because there are still those who need love, and because God never left this place. I smiled through tears. That was the first time I felt completely at home. Not because I had found answers, but because I no longer needed them. I had presence. I had Thérèse. I had God. And those nights of adoration, those moments of silence in the frozen dark, became the light that illuminated my inner world. Where I encountered the sacred not in grandeur, but in absolute stillness. Perhaps this is the secret of holiness, not to be seen, but to see others, not to be remembered, but to never stop loving. And I will always remember those nights. Nights when I was never alone. Nights when Thérèse was still there, and still praying with me. Chapter 4: The Mirror of the Heart. I came to visit Sister Genevieve one breezy afternoon, when dry leaves swirled around the convent courtyard like old memories refusing to rest. She was one of the oldest sisters at Sainte-Madeleine, her hair white as candle ash. Her eyes faded yet somehow bright whenever she spoke of faith. They said she once taught philosophy and theology before retreating to a quieter life of prayer. There was something about her that made me trust her, a calmness that wasn't forced. Like a lake untroubled because it knows its own depth. I asked her, softly, Sister Thérèse, do you believe she's still here? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she motioned toward the bench beneath the window and invited me to sit. Then she poured some tea. her hands trembling but steady. After a moment, she began to speak, slowly, as if flipping through a familiar old page in her memory. I met her for the first time, in a dream. 40 years ago. I looked up, my heart tightened slightly, as if I had just brushed against something sacred. I was young then, she continued, just as unsure as you are now. I would cry alone in my room some nights, not knowing why I was here or what I was doing with this life. Then one night, I dreamed of her. She said nothing, just stood there, in the chapel, looking at me. That gaze, it didn't judge. It didn't pity. It was like a mirror. A mirror, I echoed. The mirror of the heart. She nodded. When I looked at her, I saw myself, not my mistakes or my weaknesses, but the part of me still waiting to be healed. I clenched my hands quietly in my lap. Since then, she went on, she would sometimes appear in my dreams. Rarely speaking, sometimes just a light touch on the shoulder when I'd fallen asleep over my books. Sometimes, a lily petal landing softly on the page I was reading. Small signs, but more real than words. She still helps souls? She smiled, slowly, like golden light settling on the edge of the day. She never left, not because she was trapped, but because she's still helping. Especially those who are close to falling and don't even know they need a hand. From that afternoon on, I started writing things down, not to collect proof, but to listen more deeply to my own heart. I wrote about the times I felt someone walking softly beside me in the hallway. About opening a book at random and finding just the scripture verse I needed. About moments of sorrow or confusion when I'd find a white flower on my desk. Even though I couldn't recall anyone putting it there, I called these pages the Journal of Trust. Because the more I wrote, the more I realized she didn't appear when I was strong, but when I was most fragile. Not to perform miracles, but to remind me I was never alone. Once, I stood before the mirror after morning prayer. Sunlight angled in through the window, casting a thin silk-like beam across the glass. I saw my reflection, pale, tired eyes still swollen from a sleepless night. I saw a girl who was trying, and just then, I felt a presence behind me, not a reflection, but something real. I didn't turn around, I just whispered, "Sister Thérèse, I see you." I didn't hear an answer, but my heart felt lighter. I thought of Sister Genevieve's words, "She didn't leave, because she still loves." And I began to understand. We don't need grand miracles to believe. Sometimes, all we need is a gaze, a wordless understanding, a soft light reflected in the mirror of our hearts. Because it's precisely when we dare to look deep into our fear, our emptiness, the pain we carry, that she comes. Not to erase it, but to be present, so we no longer see just the pain, but see ourselves loved within that pain. And I believe that is the greatest miracle. One night I dreamed I was standing in a garden bathed in moonlight. There was no sound, no one around me, but when I reached to touch a lily, a voice echoed, not from outside, but from somewhere deep within. "You have never been abandoned." I woke with tears on my face. From that day, I began walking alone in the garden after dinner. Not to seek anything, just to walk in silence. And sometimes, I felt my footsteps brush against something that had long been there, a gentle presence. Not wishing to intrude, yet always present. Sister Genevieve called it the mirror of the heart. I began to think of it as an invisible mirror within my chest, each time I faced myself honestly. In all my weakness and truth, that mirror didn't reflect failure, it reflected mercy. One morning, while cleaning the Old West corridor windows, I saw my reflection in the dusty glass. The outside light made my face clearer than usual, and I remembered Thérèse's gaze in Genevieve's dream, the gaze that didn't judge or instruct, only looked to understand, looked to love, and I prayed quietly, let me also look at others this way, without fear, without pride, only with mercy. At the end of that day, when I closed my notebook, I wrote this line: some people are present through their words, some through their silence, but only those who truly love can be present through their gaze. I believe Thérèse is one of them, and each day that passes, I learn to be present like her, quietly, but truly, not to shine, but to be faithful, to God, to others, and to my own heart. Chapter 5: The Test of Faith. It all began with a strange kind of silence. Sister Elise, a young sister only 2 years older than me, suddenly became quieter than ever. She no longer smiled during gardening, no longer hummed softly while sweeping the hallway. At meals, she sat at the far end of the table, eating slowly, eyes always cast downward. I noticed it for a week without daring to ask. Elise was gentle, kind, and always carried a soft inner light. She arrived at Sainte-Madeleine the same time I did, and we often shared our first nights of Eucharistic adoration together, hands trembling in the cold night, but hearts warm from silent companionship. Until one evening, I found her sitting alone in the garden after Vespers. She sat on the old stone bench, no shawl, shoulders shivering. I sat beside her. We were silent for a long while. Then she spoke. "My mother is gone." I turned to look at her. Her face was pale like wax, and her eyes were swollen red. "Elise, I didn't know. No one does." She cut in, her voice barely above a whisper. "The news came yesterday. Sudden. An accident. I didn't even get to send a final letter." I said nothing more. I simply reached out and held her cold hand. In the days that followed, Elise was hardly herself. She missed prayer hours, often arrived late to meals. When reciting psalms, her voice was lifeless. I saw her sit for hours before the statue of Our Lady, lips pressed tight, eyes hollow. One afternoon, I found her in the laundry room, still holding a wet towel while staring out into the endless rain. I approached, but before I could speak, she said, "I don't think I should be here anymore." My heart sank. "Elise, you don't have to make any decisions now. God understands your grief." "No, you don't understand." She turned to me, and this time her eyes were sharp like glass. "You don't understand. How could God take my mother away? How am I supposed to believe in any promise anymore? The prayers, the devotions, they all feel empty now. Just echoes." I had no words to respond. That night, I knelt longer than usual in the chapel. My heart was heavy. I thought of Elise, of her words, her pain, that kind of loss no one is ever prepared for. And I whispered, "Sister Thérèse, if you're still here, please help Elise. Help her feel what she can't name. Help her know that you too have known loss, pain, weariness, yet you stayed. You still believed. You still loved. I didn't know if that prayer reached anywhere. But that night, I dreamt of a soft light in the chapel. So gentle, so warm, and I woke up with the strangest feeling, as if someone had heard. 2 days later, it happened. It was nearly midnight. I was on my adoration shift when I heard a faint sound behind me. Turning, I saw Elise at the chapel doorway. Her face pale, her eyes fixed on the Blessed Sacrament. "Elise?" I called softly. She didn't respond. She walked slowly toward the altar. Just a few steps away, she collapsed onto the stone floor. I rushed to her, cradled her head. Her face was icy cold. Another sister from the next shift ran to get the infirmarian. Elise regained consciousness a few hours later in the infirmary. Her eyes were dreamy at first, but slowly came back into focus. When she saw me sitting there, she smiled faintly. I saw her. I held my breath. "Who? Elise?" she whispered, like wind passing through a shuttered window. A woman in a white habit. Her face was strange, yet familiar. She didn't speak, just took my hand, led me before the Blessed Sacrament. Then she pointed, not with her hand, but with her eyes. I shivered. Elise. That was. I don't know her name, but I know she wasn't alive. And I also know I saw heaven through the eyes of a nameless sister. I said nothing more. We sat there in silence. The next day, Elise left the infirmary and went straight to the chapel, where she knelt before the Blessed Sacrament for a long time. From that moment on, she never mentioned leaving the convent again. In fact, she became even quieter, more contemplative. Every morning, I saw her rise early, light candles, and clean the altar with the gentleness of someone touching something sacred. Sister Madeleine said to me, her eyes squinting warmly, "Perhaps we should call her the guardian of the chapel." "Her?" I asked, though I already knew. "Thérèse," she nodded, "the one who never left, because she never stopped loving us." From then on, whenever someone's faith began to falter, we would whisper her name, not loudly, not dramatically, just a soft plea, "Please, stay with me tonight." And I believe, somewhere in the flickering candlelight, in the gentle scent of lilies, she remains, not to be remembered, but to love, to keep watch, and to lead every wandering soul back to the place where the light never fades. Chapter 6: A Light in the Dark. That March, the rain came more frequently than usual. It was cold, persistent, and damp, seeping into everything, even the soul. Around the same time, a new flu outbreak began spreading through the nearby villages. At first, it was just a few isolated cases. Then more, until even the parishes surrounding us were affected. No one at the convent panicked. Perhaps we were used to fragility. Or maybe, this wasn't the first time Saint Madeleine had stood on the threshold between darkness and light. Once again, the sisters donned their long habits, packed medicine kits, towels, herbal oils, and left the convent each morning to care for the sick. We divided the nearby homes and elderly residents among ourselves. No one complained, no one hesitated. It was as if a distant memory had awakened and come alive again. Someone said, "It's just like in 1734. and I knew who they were thinking of. Sister Thérèse. In the evenings, when we returned to the convent, we would often sit around the dinner table in silence. We were tired, yes, and worried, but somehow, there was still a peace among us that I couldn't explain. During late-night adoration, I saw many sisters kneel for long periods without saying a word. Just silence, as if waiting for another breath, someone keeping vigil beside them. Then one night, during the season's first storm, the power went out across the region. The chapel fell into total darkness. Only the occasional flashes of lightning lit the stained glass windows from outside. I carried a candle inside, intending to light the Blessed Sacrament as usual. But then, I froze. Because I saw light, not from candles, not from electricity, but from the tabernacle, a soft glow, like golden breath, radiating from within, not glaring, not overwhelming, but clear, enough to spill across the stone floor and reveal the outline of a figure, standing guard beside it. A woman, dressed in white, head slightly bowed, hands clasped in front, motionless, silent, but present. I wasn't afraid, not even surprised. I knelt down, and I knew I wasn't the only one. Later, I heard the other sisters whisper, in gentle voices, "Did you see the light?" Even without power, there was light from that place. I saw someone by the altar. No one panicked, no one questioned. There was only a strange comfort that spread, like incense filling the chapel. The next day, news spread through the convent. Little Clara, the daughter of Madame Louise from the neighboring village, had awakened after nearly a week in a coma. The doctors had given up. They said there was no more hope. Her lungs were weak, heart exhausted, severe infection. But that morning, Madame Louise woke to hear her daughter whisper, "Mama." The girl sat up, still weak, but her eyes sparkled. No pain, no labored breathing. She simply said, "I saw a lady in white. She told me not to be afraid." Then she touched my chest, where it hurt, and there was light. When I heard that, it was like a jolt. I ran to find Sister Madeleine, and with just one look in her eyes, I knew she was thinking the same as me. Madame Louise came to the convent a week later, carrying Clara in her arms, eyes brimming with tears. She spoke quietly. "Years ago, when I was just a young girl, a nun once helped me. I don't remember her name, only her eyes. And her white habit, I've never forgotten. Today, I believe she returned. Not for me, but for my daughter." We didn't record the story in medical reports. We didn't announce it to the public. But from that day forward, every soul in the convent held one quiet certainty. This chapel has never been left unguarded. Even when the night is dark, even when the power fails, even when sickness surrounds us, there is still light, and there is still someone, with a white habit and nameless eyes, remaining, loving, and protecting all those who no longer have the strength to stand. A light in the dark. And because of that, we continue to pray, continue to love, and continue to stay. Chapter 7. She never left. I write these lines with hands that tremble and eyes that no longer clearly see each word. The yellowed pages before me are no longer a place for storytelling, but a resting place for the last breath of memory. I have spent more than half my life within the walls of Sainte-Madeleine. From a wounded young woman who came here with a heart full of confusion, I have lived through bright springs and freezing winters, through loss, healing, trials, and love, and what I have never doubted is that she stayed. Sister Thérèse. No one ever found her grave. No one knows exactly what her face looked like. But in every prayer, in every flickering candle at the altar, every time the chapel bells rang at dawn, I knew she was present. I saw her when a sister collapsed in pain but still managed to rise again before the Blessed Sacrament. I felt her when an anonymous young girl entered the convent in tears and, years later, became the quiet guardian of the night chapel. I heard her sing, not in sound, but in the deep consolation that came during the loneliest prayers. People asked me, "How do you know it was her?" I don't answer, because holiness does not always take form. True holiness is a nameless light, an invisible warmth, a lingering presence. Sister Thérèse did not leave footprints. She left presence, and I believe that is how she was sent. Sainte-Madeleine remains a modest place, not crowded, not loud, but every week, every month, someone still quietly arrives. They don't come looking for grand miracles. They come in search of peace. They kneel for hours in the chapel. Some leave behind a white flower. Others simply sit and leave with a smile. I never have to ask why. I know. I write it down so it won't be forgotten. So that one day, if someone happens to pick up this old notebook, they'll understand. Some souls are sent by God not to perform the extraordinary, but to remind us that God is never absent. And tonight, I sit here, in the chapel, the final night of adoration in my life. A single candle before the Blessed Sacrament burns slowly, and I can no longer clearly hear the bells as I once did. But I hear something else, a song, from far away, soft, like wind, like a voice echoing from another life. I open my eyes, and the light appears, a gentle glow from the tabernacle, spreading across the chapel, resting on the figure standing quietly. Just as before, white habit, hands folded, head slightly bowed. I am not surprised. I simply smile, because I know it is time for her to bring me home. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Matthew chapter 5 verse 8. Sometimes, holiness doesn't leave footprints. It lingers like incense, not to be seen, but to be breathed in. And if you are still enough, sincere enough, you'll realize she never left. Hello everyone. This is Fogman Stories. This story was written and shared with you as we approach the Easter season. Wishing you a peaceful and blessed Easter, filled with hope and grace. I don't speak much English myself, so I asked an AI voice to help tell the story. To be honest, it doesn't feel entirely joyful to admit that, but I believe being open with you is better than pretending otherwise. This story ends here for now. I hope to see you again in the next stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any new videos. Thank you so much for being here.